Good morning, everyone. I think I was on the mute while I just started. Never mind. Just wanted to do a quick thank you to Shomika and the team for coordinating and helping this, and to CII and for all the members who have joined in. A very good morning to all of you. As Shomika mentioned, today's topic is the new phase of knowledge management. Before I get started, I think Shomika had done a quick round of introduction about myself, so I'm not going to kind of run through it again. And I'm just going to leave my Twitter and LinkedIn links in here for all of you guys who access the presentation at a later stage can always find myself on the internet and connect with me. Very quickly, before we deep dive into the topic for today, just wanted to set a little bit of a context here. All of us have been seeing how fast the world today is evolving, especially the organizations and the models that are changing in today's era. Especially if you look around, you'll realize that we're no more working through specific offices. People are always working remotely. There are no fixed working hours. We end up working beyond just the usual working hours. And more importantly, we are seeing people from a lot of diverse cultural background, from a variety of demography. Now, with all of this in mind, it's becoming very difficult for the traditional business models to continue to, provide the support that they have been doing all these years. So they are very quickly actually getting obsolete, with especially with the collaborative economy that's coming into the picture. Having said all of that, we obviously need to rethink knowledge management as well as we look at this new world of work that's coming our way. And in order to reimagine that, we obviously need to consider a few of the newer concepts, new trends, new technologies, if I may, to actually tackle the knowledge management issues that we have seen in the past. So in a sense, in today's session, it's going to be a very high level kind of a session covering the various trends and topics, concepts, as well as technologies, which are things that we all need to start looking to, think about as we go about tackling knowledge management in today's era, and especially the 20th century organizations that we are seeing. So let me get started with that. A quick slide on the agenda for today. So just keeping it very simple, I'm going to start off with what really is game, but more importantly, what it is not, because I think that's where the crux of the concern is. But followed by the concept technologies and that I mentioned. Also cover a bit of what role the leadership and the top management in each organization can play, as well as some of the challenges, and a quick look at what we are trying to do at Happiest Minds from a knowledge management standpoint. All right, so before we get started, so here we are, right? So we talk about knowledge management, we keep mentioning it in pretty much every organization, but it's not really what you think, right? It's not really the usual corporate function that we just talk about that needs to be there in every organization. It's not about a tool or technology always. We always get too bogged down by a tool or a platform saying, oh, that is knowledge management. If we implement or do a deployment of a particular tool, that's knowledge management. But it's not really that. It's also not a one-person job. It's not a one department or one team job either. No one tool, no one person, no one department is going to be able to do that. Having said all of that, it's definitely, most important part is it's definitely not an end state. It's an ongoing journey, right? It's not an end state where we say, okay, this is it, we are done with knowledge management. It's not that. So just getting this aside, right? So this is not knowledge management. This is not what we are trying to achieve. So what is it then? If you go with the traditional, more of the factual definitions out there, the one that I've picked here, obviously there are many out there, but the one that I've picked here is from Wikipedia. So I'm just going to quickly read through that. So it basically says it's a knowledge management as the process of capturing, developing, sharing, and effectively using organizational knowledge. Now, what it means essentially is it provides people, process, and technology to help the knowledge flow to the right people at the right time, so that we can work more efficiently and effectively. Now that's typically how we look at knowledge management. There is obviously nothing wrong with it, but what's important is to look at the underneath purpose behind what we're trying to achieve when we say something like that, right? So the three things that I've mentioned over there, obviously there are a variety of other purposes that we strive for in each organization depending on our objectives. But typically, these are the three things that most organizations look for achieving through knowledge management. One is the intellectual capital. So how do we not just build it, but how do we ensure that we're able to reuse that? Secondly, how do we ensure that we're able to make better decisions based on the content and insights that the knowledge management would provide you with? And thirdly, does it create an environment for innovation for organizations to build it as a competitive advantage? Now, with all of this at the back, I'm going to take a step back and see, okay, so what is it that the traditional knowledge management was not able to achieve, right? What is it that we were struggling with? Or rather, why were we struggling with? So three things again that I've highlighted here. I'm sure there are many others. The three things that I've highlighted here are, we end up looking at knowledge as an object, as a good, which is centrally provided, right? It's something that is available as a central location. We end up thinking that knowledge management or knowledge creation is an additional effort. It's a separate effort, right? We usually hear these concerns in organizations where people are like, I'm too busy to do knowledge management. Those are, typical aspects that we come across. The third one is the most obvious one, and my favorite is because we're trying to manage knowledge, which essentially itself is an issue. And I'll cover why that part is my favorite in the next slide here. So in reality, one really cannot manage knowledge, right? This is a fundamental philosophy that I've been sharing with most people that I interact with, or even with the various practitioners around knowledge management in our network. Forget knowledge management. I mean, you can't even know everything in the world, right? I mean, there's just so much out there in the world. There's just impossible for all of us to know everything at any given point in time. So what's important is we are always learning, right? It's a continuous process. It's an ongoing journey. It's important that we accept the fact that things around us are continuously evolving and changing, whether be it people, organizations, cultures, objectives. It could be anything and everything. So if you look around, things are evolving. So what could be knowledge today might be useful tomorrow, but at the same time, there will be newer stuff that would be out there which would be required for you to kind of gather as well as we go on in that evolution of things around us. So it's important to accept that it's a continuous process of learning, and also importantly, it's a collective effort. It's not so much about me knowing everything. It's a collective effort. So what is the bottom line to this, right? So how do we do knowledge management? If this is the case, then how do we actually benefit from what we used to call knowledge management? How do we achieve those purposes that we had looked at in the previous slide? So what we can do is know a couple of things. One, who to ask, and the other is where to look. I think those two are fundamental ways in which we learn, we gather knowledge, and we also, in the process, share with other people in our networks. I'll kind of build on top of that in the following slides as well. So as you can see, when we say we want to ask around, or when we want to know who it is or where to find, it essentially means it's a way of working. It's more of a mindset, a culture where we want to share with people. We want people to learn to collaborate with each other. We want people to be transparent. We want people to question things. We want people to ask around. So it's more of a behavioral change, more of a mindset and a cultural change that we want to inculcate in the organizations to actually help achieve what we are trying to do. On the top surface, what we see as knowledge management. Underneath, it's really trying to achieve these cultural changes, these behavioral changes about certain people in the organization. So it's more of a transformational program, if you ask me, where we want people to start looking at new ways of working, new ways of interacting and connecting with people. Most importantly, it it's something that needs to be part of everything we do. Just correlating to what I was saying earlier, it's not an end state, it's a continuous effort, and most importantly, with the culture change, it needs to be something that's part of everything we do and not an additional work or a separate effort that we need to do, what we call as knowledge management. So with all of those bits and pieces about knowledge and knowledge management, and a bit of I would say my thoughts around how I want to perceive knowledge management and approach that for various organizations, I'm going to get into the next phase of this webinar, where I'm going to cover some of the concepts that I think are interesting and would be playing a fairly important role as we approach KM in this new era. I've obviously picked just 2 or 3 of them. I'm sure there are plenty of them out there. These are 3 that really I think will play a key role. So I'm going to cover those in our webinar today. The first one being the working out loud movement that some of you must have heard about. Working out loud as a concept was put together, or rather made famous, by John Stepper, where he's actually also written a book which has gone a long way in helping a variety of organizations in achieving this concept. Now, what does working out loud really mean, right? So when you work out loud, you essentially are asking yourself, what am I trying to accomplish? Who can help me? Or how can I contribute to these people? Or, more importantly, how do I connect with certain people? So in the process of working out loud, you're making your thoughts and the activity that you're doing more visible to people around you, to the network you're part of, to the teams you're part of, and in your organization. Now, in a very subtle way, you're actually sharing what you're doing. That is the fundamental approach that you need to follow in knowledge management. The first cultural change that we talked about earlier as well was sharing. So how do we get in people to share more comfortably, share more regularly? And working out loud is one of those concepts which allows us to do that, right? Now, taking it more from a theoretical standpoint, working out loud talks about 5 elements in them. One is making you and your work visible. Second is leading with generosity. So essentially saying that you want to genuinely really share with people on what you're doing, or what's worked for you or what's not worked for you. Third is about yourself. How do you ensure that you're improving yourself? And of course, in the process, others as well within your team or others. But more importantly, are you building a social network around you? And is it really being purposeful? Now, being purposeful obviously is extremely important in today's era. If you look at a lot of things that Alan Lipowski and others have been talking about, is really driving things based on the purpose, right? Unless there is a purpose behind what we are trying to do, we are really not going to be able to achieve what we're trying to achieve. Now, with all of those elements and the theory aside, I think what's important is, I mean, if you look at the slide as well, if you look at certain elements in there, what's important is a lot of this is something that's either implicitly already happening, or it's something that we probably need to inculcate as an explicit behavioral change in the way we do. Now, working out loud could happen for a variety of reasons. It could be for sharing ideas. It could be for asking questions. It could be about things that we're doing in our network. It could be blocks and problems that we have stuck with. It could be pretty much anything and everything that you're doing on a day-to-day basis. In fact, it could be more ephemeral, as saying that I'm at so-and-so location. Sorry, I'm at so-and-so location today and would like to meet people around in that new office. So on and so forth. So essentially, it could be anything and everything that you're doing on a day-to-day basis, which might be useful for somebody else. And if you look at the where part and the why part, I think the where part is essentially the media in which you want to do that. Now, if you look at it closely, you'll realize that there's also a mention of things like posters and sticky notes. If you're working in an agile software development kind of a setup, then you must be familiar with card walls and things like that. So it's not necessarily just about tools and technologies and devices, but it could also be working out loud by making your work visible through card walls or through posters and things like that. So at the end of it, what's important is when you're doing this what and through the where, it's really about solving certain problems, or it should be about sharing with certain set of people. And it's more importantly also to save time and help in the co-creation and innovation processes that the organizations are looking to leverage on. So that's essentially working out loud in a nutshell. I'm sure there will be more to it, and each of these concepts can be a separate webinar in itself, but I would like to cut short over here on the working out loud and move on to the next concept, which is community management. Now, this again is one of my pet favorite kind of a topic when it comes to knowledge management. It's also something that I've regularly been practicing in my previous roles before I joined Happiest Minds. I think if you look at the slide again, it's obviously at a very futuristic kind of a setup that they've shown in this slide. This is obviously, if some of you are familiar, it's a Dion Hinchcliffe image. A lot of his infographics are extremely popular on the web. This is essentially, if you think of community management, right? It's, in fact, even before I go to community management, I'll probably quickly define what a community means when we talk about that in the context of knowledge management. So a community essentially is a group of people with shared values, behaviors, and maybe artifacts. It's about building relationships, right? They all have a common goal or a common vision that they want to achieve. So it's essentially a group of people coming together with shared values, right? That's what a community typically is. Now, if you look at the diagram, what we're really trying to achieve over here, or what we're trying to say over here is, we have community in all our organizations, right? Those communities could be project teams, which are more explicit, where the set of members in that team are explicitly defined. The vision and the goals are obviously explicitly defined because you're working for a particular client, for a particular project. But it could also be more of the subtle communities which exist across organizations based on your skills, based on topics of interest. So there could be a community of developers in your organization, a community of say a common interest such as music, for example. So there could be various people coming together with a set of shared interests. Now, what we're trying to get to is, how do we leverage this when it comes to knowledge management? Now, with community management, what we achieve is we are actually helping build a networked organization. Now, the more connected you are, the better relationship that you have built with the variety of people in your organization, the more useful and more easy it's going to be for you to find information and look for people. Now, we've seen this work very comfortably on the consumer side, where things on Facebook, we post on Facebook or Twitter, and we get the responses from absolute strangers, which could actually come in handy for what you're looking for. The way it works is it works on the network effect, right? So we are trying to see the same thing inside the organization, where how do we get a set of people together and share their knowledge and work together and co-create on interesting things, as well as that network indirectly helping a variety of other smaller networks revolving around them, which will eventually help the larger organizational objectives. Now, these communities, like I mentioned earlier, could be specific to a team or a function, but it could actually continue to, if you start looking at it at a macro level, your entire organization can work as one community as well. And if you take it to the next level, then you could use community as a business model in itself. Now, just to give you a few examples that all of us are very familiar with, most of us have used Uber for ride sharing and for our cab service in most of our Indian cities and around the world. There are a bunch of other I would say business models such as Airbnb, for example, which are doing phenomenal job in using communities to actually provide you an accommodation service in around the world. You could take an example of, for example, Coursera or Udemy, where they're providing a community and aggregated service for e-learning. So there are essentially business models now building on top of community as a concept, and they're essentially using the same community management framework, same community management concepts in them to actually make that happen. Now, if you start thinking the same concepts working internally, then they can have amazing effects, amazing impact inside an enterprise when we look at it from a knowledge management standpoint as well. Let me quickly run through the next one, which is something that I've personally seen a lot of debate around. So gamification, before I get to the debate bit, let me quickly kind of explain or rather define what gamification is. So gamification is the concept of applying game mechanics and game design techniques to engage and motivate people to achieve their goals. Now, a lot of us might think, okay, what does that mean, or how does that impact inside the organization? Now, what's important to understand is at the bottom of everything, all of us are humans. We have those typical human traits and characteristics which make us the way we are, which make us do certain things the way we do, right? Now, if you think of things like motivation, desires, feedback, all of these things are very subjective to specific people. What could be feedback to me could be different from what could be feedback for somebody else. Same way, if somebody is providing a feedback to me, that is a very subjective representation of that person that I'm getting to know about it. Now, with all of those behavioral traits about humans in place, where does gamification play a role, right? So what gamification is essentially trying to do is it's essentially trying to tap into all of these behavioral traits. And as we all know how games are, I mean, games in general that we play in our lives, on our devices, etc., they essentially bring out a different side of us, which we usually don't see ourselves playing a role in. It could be because of various elements. Now, I won't get into, there are like various elements of game mechanics, but if you think of things like competition or a leaderboard, right? We get excited when we see a leaderboard, and it basically compares yourself with somebody else. Or you could take an example of a point system. If you want, you could probably look at rewards and recognition. What we have been doing in our organizations all these years when it comes to rewards and recognition from a HR standpoint is also in a way to look at it from is like a gamification model. It's a way in which we are intrinsically motivating people to do things that we want them to do, or things that would help them and the organization do better for achieving the objectives we are trying to achieve. Now, having said all of that, when we hear gamification, we end up thinking, oh, it's just about games, it must be related to fun, it's not really about work. But that's not really true, because what's important is, and this is where the debate comes in, it's that a lot of gamification exercises or programs fail because there's too much emphasis given on the game elements and the game design and things like that. But in the process, it's not been addressed to actually tie it back to the objectives you're trying to achieve. Now, we could have amazing games, amazing fun interactions around them, but if they don't tie into the objectives that the organization is trying to achieve through the games, then it's obviously not going to work in the way that you're expecting it to. So it's important that we don't look at it as a new effort, as a new program of sorts, but think of it as a layer, kind of a sheet on top of, a fabric on top of what's already existing in our organization. It could be a variety of processes that you have in your organization, which could be gamified. So it's not like a silo sitting in the corner like a game that somebody can go and play, but it's something that's closely tied into what we do in each of our processes in our organization. So it needs to be very closely tied up with the objectives of the organization. Um, all right, so with that, I'm going to quickly summarize in the next slide. Uh, Not exactly summarize, but just quickly kind of run through a larger set of things that we can expect from a concept standpoint, which is what we call as the future of work. Future of work is a way that people are talking about on the internet today, which talks about a variety of things that are going on in the world today. It could be different behavioral changes that we are seeing, modern technologies that we are seeing coming into our lives, the big game that mobility is playing. Of course, the workforce is changing, like I mentioned earlier, and also globalization. There's a huge interconnect between a variety of worlds around, and with all of these forces, it's becoming extremely important to take cognizance of these new trends and kind of apply them or consider them to be applied when you approach knowledge management as well. All right, with that, let me move to the next section, which is where I'm going to talk about some of the technologies again, which are doing interesting things in the world today, especially in the game space. The first one is graph technology. Now, some of you from the technical side might have heard about this, but actually the interesting thing is we all experience this on a day-to-day basis, whether we experience it on the consumer side, on the Googles and the Facebooks of the world, or anywhere else, but this is already happening. It's something that a lot of leading organizations are tapping into today, where they're really making the most of the new emerging technologies around graph technology and a bunch of others. Now, what you see over here is obviously a diagram I have used from Microsoft side. It's something that Microsoft has been doing of late, but a variety of other players have played a big role in this as well, in leveraging the graph technology. Now, what is graph technology, right? So essentially think of it as, again, a fabric sitting underneath everything and anything that's going on in your organization. Now, if you think of it from your standpoint as a person, you will be able to, rather this fabric will be able to track anything and everything that you're doing in the organization, right? It can sound creepy at times, but it's still behind your organizational firewall, so it's not really being shared externally. What's important to focus over here is the fact that it not only tracks the explicit stuff, such as what activity you're doing and things like that, but it's also getting into the details of using the metadata that's already available with the organizations. Now, if I'm part of a project team, the tool should typically already know that I am connected and working with so-and-so people who are part of my project team. Similarly, if I am located in Bangalore in one of my Happiest Minds offices, then the system already knows that I am working at so-and-so location. And if you start building onto those things, there are tons and tons of information that resides in our various applications internally, whether it's CRM, HRMS, and various other tools that we use internally in an enterprise. And all of that data is sitting just in silos. Now, what does the graph technology help us do is, it helps us build a context around it and make sense of that data. Now, if there is an interaction that is happening between me and my team member versus my location that plays a role in that discussion as well, then this system is going to be able to make sense of both of them together. So essentially, graph technology helps you build a nice network of the activity, people, and information within your organization. Now, that can be extremely powerful when you start to see some of the results that various players are playing out there in the market. I'm going to cover one of them in a slide later, which is the Microsoft product, which we are using internally as well. But most of the leading community platform providers or intranet site providers, as well as the big players like Microsoft and IBMs of the world, are providing graph technology in their services. The second one is, again, something which we have seen a boom in the recent times, right? We all use Facebook Messenger, WhatsApp, WeChat, and a bunch of other conversational applications. But what we are seeing as a big change coming through is they're not just anymore a place where we go and have a conversation, but we can actually start to have interaction with applications on the other end as well. And that's where the cognitive computing and conversational interfaces are coming together. Now, if you look at what the consumer side of the web is doing in terms of, for example, what Facebook Messenger and the Slack bots that are doing are essentially allowing you to converse with a bot or an application on the other end. Now, this can again be extremely powerful because as you must have used some of the personal assistants out there, like Apple's Siri or Microsoft Cortana or Amazon Echo or Facebook's M. There are a bunch of them. Pretty much every big player in the market today is working on the personal assistant side. Now, imagine that kind of experience available to us internally inside the enterprise. Now, you might think that this seems like a very far-fetched idea, but a lot of this is already happening. If you look at especially what Slack is doing inside the enterprise, is that it's provided a whole suite of Slack bots where you could essentially type in anything and maybe ask a question or get factual informations and so on and so forth. So you could actually just go into a bot and say, give me the contact information of so-and-so person in your organization, and you might get a response from that person, which is actually pulling in information from somewhere else. But what's important is the way people and the users interact with the technology and leverage technology to consume knowledge is changing dramatically. And with these technologies like the conversational interface as well as the cognitive computing, it's becoming extremely powerful in the way we are able to achieve that. I'm going to quickly run through, just looking at the time, I'm going to quickly run through some of the other technologies in here as well. There's one which I've put in here. Obviously, now don't get too bogged down by the diagram that you see over here. I'm sure it's not making too much sense to a lot of people, but short form communication, and I'm going to start with some examples so that you're able to relate to what I'm trying to say over here. If you guys have used Snapchat or Vine or Periscope, or even if you've probably heard or read about them, you'll realize that there's a whole new wave of tools out there which are helping, especially the millennials, quote unquote millennials, people of today's era, the youngsters of today's era, to actually converse in an extremely short form communication, which is very time bound for that activity. Now, if you start looking at those can be applied inside the enterprise as well. And the reason I've put in the X and the Y axis over there is just to give you a little example of where we are today when you look at the top right, which is your SharePoints and the blogs and the emails of the world, versus where the Snapchats and the Periscopes and the Vines of the world are. You could look at things like Yammer or some of the various other short form messaging applications somewhere in the center maybe. But essentially what we are trying to map over here is look at how slow or permanent the information is going to be. Is that something which needs to stay forever? For example, things like case studies that we usually talk about in knowledge management, they are typically permanently kept in a repository for future use. Now, those are things which don't change very often. On the other side of that spectrum is the ephemeral stuff, which is essentially things which happen on a quick basis, and the use of that information is probably very time bound. It's not something that can be much of use at a later stage. For example, if there is a simple thing like I'm coming late for a meeting, then the information usage of that piece is only useful for that meeting or for that particular day. If you look at that piece of information at a later stage, it's not really going to add much context or much knowledge to what we are trying to achieve. But at the same time, that's still required and it's important. So how do we bring in a set of technologies which are able to achieve each of these parts of the spectrum? And at the same time, if you look at the x-axis, we also have the long form and the short form content, right? So when we say long form, it essentially means something that's going to be like a blog or a document or an email or things like that. On the short form, it's going to be more of status updates or your presence information, notifications, and things like those. So it's a matrix of all of these which we are looking at. But what's important is, like I said earlier, it's not really about whether any of this is really happening and showing value in knowledge management, but it's important that we relook at these things and consider how these can be applied inside the enterprise, because we're already seeing a bunch of these things happening inside the enterprise. It's just that we are not able to achieve the goals as yet. And I think it's early days. So I think once we are matured in this space, we'll be able to see a lot more from these ephemeral and short form content as well. The last one, very quickly, is going to be about the enterprise app store. This again is a favorite one for most CIOs out there. We've all used apps and app stores when we use a mobile device, whether it's Android, Windows, or the iOS platforms. Now, the same concept is becoming huge inside the enterprise as well. Again, all big players are out there providing app stores, providing mechanisms to build simple, easy-to-use apps from your existing data pieces or data models. What we are looking at essentially is making it more easy, more self-service, and more contextual for each person inside the organization to leverage the different applications that are available to them. Now, if I have to give you examples, the applications or simple tools that a finance department would like to use will be slightly different from what an HR department would use versus what an engineering department would use, and vice versa, right? So each team based on the task that they are involved in would require a different set of tools. Now, if we look at the traditional mindset, we used to look at deploying one application which is going to be applied to all the users around the world inside the organization, and we either see no adoption for that because obviously it's not applicable to everyone, but at the same time there were no mechanisms to actually group these based on the task and then only apply them to specific people. Now, with cloud computing and a variety of other new age mechanisms, it's easier to actually configure and govern the way applications can be pushed out as well as being used by various people in the organization. Now, obviously, this again, the diagram from Dion Hinchcliffe is just a very high level look at how it works, the way the distribution and the discovery of the applications happen between the consumption with the different users. And more importantly, it also helps reduce the tension and the effort that the IT department of all organizations put in trying to satisfy every user group inside the organization. Of course, there are challenges to that as well, which I'll cover in a slide coming up soon. But with this, I'm covering the concepts and the technology piece. I'm going to quickly run through two slides, one about the role of the leadership that can be played in this new age, and the second one is about the challenges, like I mentioned here. So when we talk about a new way of working, when we talk about a cultural change, a mindset change, a transformation for your organization, obviously we need to think of a disruptive style of leadership as well. Now, some of the things that you're seeing on the slide would be pretty obvious, but I think they play a extremely critical role when it comes to things like knowledge management, because they are generally abused in the past. So it's got more importance that the leadership focuses on these aspects as well. I'm going to quickly run through them. The first one being the owning and execution of the knowledge management program. Now, again, we have said this enough number of times in the past as well. For any transformation program to be successful, be it KM or anything else, it's important that the leadership is not just owning it, as an ownership stand, but actually is involved in executing and making it happen. One of the ways to do that would be to actually be someone who's walking the talk, right? It's a phenomenal example to see when the leadership themselves are walking the talk in making knowledge management effort be visible as a program that they're trying to achieve across the organization. It's extremely important that it's not just a form of communication that we see from the leadership, but it's actual involvement on a day-to-day basis. However, apart from that, there are also aspects such as investing time and money to run it as an ongoing effort. Now, if you remember, I had mentioned earlier, it's not an end state. It's something that's going to continuously run for the time the organization is going to exist. Think of any other corporate function, right? We think of finance, we think of HR, we think of bunch of other even for that matter operations and admin. You cannot imagine a company working without all of these functions, because they are doing what is helping you run your core business on a day-to-day basis. So it's important that we look at KM as the same way, as an ongoing effort which is going to continuously run in the background, and hence invest the right amount of time and money into that for it to be able to achieve its objectives as well. While doing this, there are a couple of changes in the way leadership should look at it as well. One is they need to be extremely open and flexible to adopting the new trends and the concepts and the technologies, some of which I've mentioned here, but there are plenty others. It's important to have that open mindset. It's important that they are open to a change, open to try out new things, open to fail, if I may say that. But it's important that they are open to and flexible to go ahead and adopt some of these new mechanisms to see the transformation through. Also, focus on the people and the process aspects, which again, I think a lot of practitioners in the knowledge management space have spoken about in the past. Yes, technology is evolving, the emerging technology especially is playing an amazing role in the way knowledge management can be achieved, but we still need to focus on people and processes. If you look at my slides about the concepts, it essentially touches upon the way we can change the culture, it touches upon the processes, it touches upon the way people behave and interact with people and content. So it's important that we look at and focus on people and process aspects as well, in addition to the technology bit. Quickly moving to the challenges, I've obviously listed the usual suspects in the traditional challenges, which is adoption, ROI, and things like that. But I'm going to only focus on the new age challenges which I've put in out there, right? So when you start to compare or correlate to some of the traditional challenges that we have faced, the new age challenges look like the core reason why some of these are happening, right? By having a rigid org structure or a rigid set of processes in your organization, you're essentially making it difficult for people to go ahead and adopt newer tools or newer mechanisms or new concepts. We also need to focus extremely, and this is a challenge which I think is extremely important in today's era, is the fast evolving workforce and the demography. I've covered this a bit in the earlier slides as well, but it's extremely important that we accept the fact that things have changed. We are really evolving fast in today's world. It's no more the way it used to be in the manufacturing era in the 80s and 90s. Things are different in the 21st century. People are coming from a variety of cultural backgrounds, diverse demography, whether it's age, whether it's a variety of other things. So it's important to accept that and try and see how we can tackle those with the various concepts and the technologies that we have in place. Couple of others which I mentioned. One is the shadow IT, which, like I said earlier about in the slide of the App Store, the enterprise App Store. Shadow IT is something that's been kind of cropping up, mushrooming here and there for the last few years in a variety of organizations. Players like Yammer and Slack became famous because of shadow IT, where people could just go in and log in with your official email address and sign up for a freemium tool out there and start using them. Now, what is happening is in the process of not trying to adopt a new mechanism like an enterprise app store, you're ending up creating an environment where your users, your employees, are looking out for the app which is most useful for them, which is out there in the consumer world, which is out there for the enterprises, but we don't have it for yourself. In the process, they go ahead and sign up for something like a Yammer or a Slack bot. Now, what happens is with these kind of tools flourishing into the enterprise, there's a huge concern around the security and the privacy and the information leaks that happen through these applications, through these tools. Because obviously there's no ownership of the data that is being shared over there. But at the same time, these tools are extremely useful for the people. So it's important that we tackle this challenge by adopting new mechanisms and ensuring that you provide an environment where people are able to find and use the applications that make the most sense to them, rather than providing an environment where you create difficulties for yourself when it comes to security and privacy. The other one, which I've mentioned over there, is lack of awareness and perception. And one of the reasons I picked up the topic for today as the new face of knowledge management and the things that I'm covering today is also because I think that is the biggest challenge we are facing today in knowledge management, which is we have very lack of awareness amongst people about what knowledge management really is and what it is not. And also it's the perception, right? A lot of people will come back to you and say, hey, I've heard that, I've seen that, oh, I know what you're talking about. It's a wrong perception about knowledge management, something that they've and no hard feelings for that, because I can totally relate to them, because they've gone through an era where knowledge management failed because of not approaching it in the right way. It failed because it didn't have the right set of enabling tools and processes back then. So obviously that's changed now. So it's important that we are able to tackle this challenge of perception by changing the perception and helping create the awareness about what really is knowledge management and how do we go about tackling that in today's era. All right, with that, I'm at the last leg. I'm kind of running 5 minutes late, but I'm going to quickly run through the last leg of my presentation, which is going to talk about what we are trying to do with KM and knowledge management at Happiest Minds. We are looking at it from probably two sets of things. One is looking at it from a productivity standpoint, which is the typical immediate thing that we see when I talk about knowledge management, which is, have we done similar work before? Who's the expert in this? I have a problem. How do I go about solving it? In terms of innovation, I have a great idea. How do I kind of progress from there? So on and so forth. That's the usual thing that we need to focus on, and that obviously is going to be crux of what we're going to do or what we are doing at Happiest Minds as well. But there's also another area which we are dabbling big time into, which is the discovery part, right? So what's happening? That knowledge is becoming even more critical because, like I said earlier, it's the fast-moving world. It's the extremely diverse demography, and so on and so forth. So it's important to be in thick of things, to be in the now, to know what's going on, what's happening now. It could be around me, it could be in my location, it could be around my team, in my team or project or a function or a department, but also at a large what's going on in my organization. And if you start to relate this to the usual knowledge management concepts, it essentially is talking about knowledge being available to me, but it's more contextual to me. And that's something that traditional knowledge management failed, because there used to be a lot of knowledge, but it was not really meant to be for me. It was just there, and it was never helpful to me. And that's why everybody thought knowledge management failed. So how do we make it more contextual? And that's what we're focusing on in the discovery part. I just put in a few bullet points in there, but if you look at it, the two core areas that I've put out for this discussion is, one is the building the foundation, and the other is leveraging existing technology. Now, building the foundation, if you run through those points, you'll realize, I mean, I've been saying knowledge management all the time, and every time I say knowledge management, I tell myself we should come up with a better word or a different way of referring to knowledge management. Whether we like it or not, it's an abused word, unfortunately. But at the same time, we still use it, and I still use it, is because that's something that still relates to people. People still can think about, oh, okay, I know what you're talking about, knowledge management. Okay, it needs to be captured, codified, it needs to be reused, etc. So it's something that it's a reference point for most people because it's there. If I use something like Enterprise 2.0, then I need to sit and first define that to somebody else, and so on and so forth. There are plenty of other alternate words that can be used for knowledge management, but we still end up using that. But unfortunately, it's still been seen as an abused word, and more importantly, like I mentioned earlier, it's looked at as an additional effort. So how do we tackle that? That's the key that we're looking at. So we want to emphasize on connections and collaboration. Again, building on top of the concepts and technologies that I mentioned earlier. We want to ensure that there is enough freedom for choosing what ways you want to contribute and what ways you want to consume. In today's era, people are comfortable. Some people are comfortable writing. Some people are comfortable sharing a video. Some people are comfortable just sharing their voice over a podcast, so on and so forth. So there are various ways in which people can contribute their knowledge. We want to provide that kind of freedom to people so that they don't have to worry about, oh, I need to go to a place or a tool to contribute. Just do whatever you want, wherever you want, whichever tool is available to you. And same thing applies on the consumption side. People want structured knowledge that should be available. People want to search and find information that should be available. They should be able to search to their mobile device or the web platform, and so on and so forth. So just give that freedom to people, make it easy, make it comfortable for them so that it doesn't become an additional effort. A couple of others which I highlight. One is the culture bit. Obviously, we are focusing on developing the sharing, learning, and transparent culture. That's the transformation side we are looking at. And we're also emphasizing on building it both from top down as well as bottom up. Building communities at the bottom, helping them come together, drive the message up from a knowledge management standpoint, as well as work it the other way around, which is top down, get the leadership involved, do the walk the talk, get them involved into all the activities that we are doing, see them do things which we want people to do. So that's both ways we are trying to achieve that. Quickly moving to the other side, which is the existing technology ecosystem. So the reason I've emphasized this is because a lot of us, a lot of our organizations, we already have a lot of internal applications which we don't use. And most often the reason is lack of awareness and perception. So what we are trying to do over here is, since we are a Microsoft stack, we are actually leveraging all the things that Microsoft is already providing. Of course, luckily of late, Microsoft has evolved a lot. They've become a lot more matured to look at their tools from a KM standpoint, and their roadmap also looks pretty promising. But it's important that we are using that and then building a kind of an interface for ourselves, which will help us do something like what Google is doing today. A simple, basic landing page, but it's a gateway to anything and everything that's happening in your organization. It's not just about the search, but it's really what Google does at the back as well to provide you that knowledge. Obviously, we are exploring a lot of emerging technologies. We are focusing a lot on the unstructured part, which is your conversations and chats and the calls and conferences and things like those. And the last point, I've just mentioned some of the things that we are focusing on to build the knowledge management case over here is the search, Delph, which was the app that I didn't mention earlier, which is the Microsoft's app, which they launched, I think, a year or a couple of years back, which is an interface to showcase the Office graph technology that they have put together. It's a phenomenal app for information discovery. They have also launched the Outlook groups, which I think is going to transform most organizations where there's a Microsoft distribution list in their email system. And then SharePoint, of course. Again, SharePoint is fairly abused, as well as the perception is pretty bad about it. But SharePoint today, the one that released, I think, end of August or early September, is phenomenal. I think they've done an amazing job of not just making SharePoint cloud-based as a SaaS service, but also bringing a lot of new stuff in there in terms of the features and functionality and the UI. So there's a lot in there with Search, Delph groups, and SharePoint. Just putting those together, you'll be able to provide a phenomenal kind of knowledge management ecosystem for your users. So that's what we're trying to push for, in addition to various other things. Just quickly showing what I meant earlier. You could have emails, documents, chat conversations, videos, blogs, etc. It could be anything. Let it go into something what we are going to call as knowledge management. And eventually you're going to be able to either see the curated stuff, the search stuff, or discover what's happening around you or your team or your organization. All right, with that, I'm going to close my session. I think it's just a few minutes before 12. I'm running a little late. I hope, Shomika, that's fine. But I'm just going to open up now for questions. I know I'm running late, but I'll probably take a few questions, and I'm happy to answer some of the remaining one offline.